We live in an era of technological miracles. The greatest threat we face is not robots replacing us, but our reluctance to reinvent ourselves, says Mike Walsh, a world-class artificial intelligence expert and one of today's MasterClass speakers. My name is Katarzyna Pisarska, and in my everyday life, I'm a social entrepreneur, founder of such institutions as the European Academy of Diplomacy and the Warsaw Security Forum. I'm also a professor at the Warsaw School of Economics in Poland. Today, I have the pleasure to guide you through this extraordinary masterclass organized by Poland's CTN Foundation and Vatican's Pontifical Council for Culture. It is a very special masterclass, at least for two reasons. First, because of its important existential almost topic, the future of man, economy, and the universe. Second, due to the world-class speakers and guests we'll be seeing here with us today. The masterclass will be delivered to you in two separate parts, each constituting 90 minutes. The first part, development, but what kind, will look at the question of where are we going with the world. The second part will consider a new vision of man. So what awaits us? How should we reinvent ourselves into the future? And between these two parts, of course, we will have a 10-minute refreshment break. The whole event is aired to you from Poland, Warsaw more specifically, the European Union. But during today's transmission, we will also connect with so many different other places around the world, with the Vatican, the United States, and Asia. We will welcome representatives of a number of institutions, such as Harvard University, Cambridge University, the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and the London School of Economics. Most importantly, however, nearly 3,000 leaders representing 60 global organizations from 100 countries will join us for the masterclass with NASA and the Vatican Observatory, as you can see on this map. So again, welcome everybody. We will be able also to include you, feel your presence here at the time of questions to our speakers, and we're looking forward to them as well. So let us begin. Our first speaker had to wake up before 6 a.m. to make it for today's event. I'm sure you're very eager to meet our heroic early riser. It's no other than Artur Chmielewski, who is an engineer at NASA, and his initials make him Mr. ABC, and he owes them to his father, a famous cartoonist. Artur, are you already here with us? Hi, Artur. Great to see you. Good morning to Los Angeles. I hope you had a wonderful morning coffee this early in the day. And I always wonder, here's the coffee. And I always wondered, actually, do astronauts get to drink hot, freshly brewed coffee in space? Probably not. We'll ask you that question when we come back to you in just a moment. So now, ladies and gentlemen, let us hear the first part of our event, a preliminary speech of Mr. Artur Chmielewski.
Hello, my name is Artur Chmielewski. I work for NASA in one of the NASA centers in Pasadena, California. It's called the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. We are famous at this center for sending such vehicles as Mars rovers and for such missions as Cassini, Galileo, and a lot of other missions. And I had the pleasure to work on most of them. And here is my favorite picture from space. Why is it my favorite picture? Well, it's a picture of Saturn. It's taken by the Cassini spacecraft in 2013. And I worked on the Cassini mission. I worked on a little part called general purpose heat source radioisotope thermoelectric generators. Yeah, it's a mouthful, but I assure you it's a very important part of the spacecraft. And the spacecraft was going to fly slightly away from Saturn and take a picture of it in such a way that we can see all the moons. And then we realized, okay, we'll take a picture of all the moons, but there will be Earth in the background. So he said, kind of jokingly, one of the operators said, look, let your family know that on such and such time, you can just look up into the sky, look at Saturn. Saturn is there. You can't see it because it's during the day, but it's there. And so look at Saturn and wave. Okay. And that was obviously a joke, but the families passed it on to the neighbors passed it on to other people. And pretty soon we were just showered with messages. Which way should I be looking? How should I be waving? And it just swept the entire world. So by the time we let people know that we'll be taking that picture, there were hundreds of millions of people going out of their homes at that time and waving to Saturn, right? Okay, well, that was funny and that was interesting. And we're happy that people were so interested in space. But there's one more thing that made this picture my favorite picture of all of the space pictures. And that is that you can see the Earth there. And the Earth, you'll have to look for it. You would probably have to expand the screen and look for it. It's right there underneath, on the right side of this picture, underneath the outermost ring. And it's a tiny, tiny dot. It's probably 1 pixel. You actually, we call it here at JPL Moon Earth because both are in the same pixel. And it makes you think that we're a tiny blue dot in space, right? This is only from Saturn, and cosmos is huge, humongous. We're still within our tiny little solar system, and space is just tremendous. So I put up this picture in my office, and when I'm unhappy about something, some little thing, or somebody makes me angry, I say, how could he be saying something like this? I look at this picture and I say, we are a tiny little dot. Our Earth is a dot. I mean, how could I be unhappy about few words or something so insignificant? And it brings the things for me into perspective. And especially these days, I'm really happy about space because space is changing. Just like computers were changing about 50 years ago. Computers 50 years ago were humongous machines. They were of the size of a maybe typical room or living room. And they were just huge and they were very expensive. They were maybe at only top universities could afford them. Departments of Defense use them because their prices would go into hundreds of millions of dollars. And their programming and operation was very difficult. And they were used for the most difficult calculations. These were the computers 50 years ago. And quick fast forward to now, and we have, so what do we have? Everybody has a computer in his or her pocket, right? These are computers, and some of them are more powerful than these computers that were called supercomputers 50 years ago. And why am I talking about computers? Well, a lot of people may have not noticed, but the same thing is happening to space. We call it democratization of space. What does it mean? It means that you can build a spacecraft now and launch it into orbit for the price of a car. Right? This was only reserved for NASA, Russia, European Space Agency just several years ago. The spacecraft were very expensive, very big, difficult to launch, extremely difficult to build. Now a university or organization can build a spacecraft, launch it into orbit. Is this a threat to NASA? Is that a threat to us? Absolutely not. We're extremely happy that this is happening. NASA wants to only build the most difficult missions, right? We want to build this first of a kind, where you need to have this incredible technology. We want to answer and do things that are incredibly difficult, that are very risky, and the technology, when we first talk about it, is maybe not different from magic, right? And then magic, what is beautiful about answering these challenges is that pushes scientists, pushes engineers, pushes programmers to solve these most difficult problems. And in the process, they invent things. And in the process, they build things. And in the process, they create this technology that maybe initially sounds like magic. But then it goes into the marketplace, and it fuels the countries, fuels companies, right? I mean, the simplest example of this is what we all have next to us right now, the smartphones. The smartphone would not exist. The Apple did not invent really anything. They just put together a few space technologies, like a miniature hard drive, like the space communications, right? Everything came from government programs, and everything came from space. And now this is a company that probably has budgets higher than most of the countries and fuels the economy. So this is a wonderful thing about space, that it produces these inventions, right? That helps the economy. What is also wonderful about space and how and our missions into the farthest places in the universe, well, maybe now also into the solar system, but we are looking at extrasolar planets, is that not only the technology is developed, but that kind of expands our thinking about the world. It expands our knowledge. It expands eventually the understanding of our own planet. So when we go to Mars and we look at Mars and we say, okay, wow, we just discovered that Mars had rivers, lakes, maybe even an ocean. What happened? We don't know yet. But through space missions, we'll find out. I assure you that we'll find out what happened to Mars. And then what happened at Venus? How come Venus is so hot? This spacecraft only can survive right now a couple of hours on the surface of Venus because it gets crushed with pressure. It boils with high temperature, and then it gets dissolved in sulfuric acid. A terrible place. Venus is an incredibly difficult place to survive for any life or even a machine. But what happened there? And we don't want Earth to be just like Venus or like Mars. So we want to understand it. And we want to apply invented technology, use this technology to study the universe, and then apply it to improve the life and quality of life on Earth. And by looking at a picture like this Cassini picture, we also want to send the signal. We want people to think about it and say, we are a tiny blue dot. We should all get along. We should work toward peace, toward making our life better, into protecting our planet. And it's a universal picture of peace, of moving forward, gaining knowledge, and using this knowledge for really good purposes. And I am very proud and very happy that maybe I can make tiny, tiny contribution to that challenge. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Artur, so much for making, I think, 3 key points. That on the one side, we are just a tiny dot in space, but also that the space is changing. We see a democratization of space. And last but not least, you said what we know, exploration of space not only changes our perception of humanity, of ourselves, but also contributes to the economy. I hope to speak with you in just a moment about all 3 elements, but let me first introduce to you and to the audience our guests here with us today who will be contributing to the discussion, both online and here in the studio. So let me start with introducing our online guest. Our first online guest is connecting with us from the Vatican, and more specifically from Castel Gandolfo. It is no other but Brother Guy Consolmagno, who is the director of the Vatican Observatory and a science fiction fan, as I understand. Good morning, Brother Guy. It's wonderful to have you here. And I hope you will be able to tell us more why the Pope needs an astronomical observatory in the contemporary world. I'm sure our audience is very interested in this question. Second, with us, you can also see is a man who in 2008 won $1.6 million. And he did not win this in Casino Royale or in a ticket lottery or even not in a computer game. He actually received a scientific prize, the American John Templeton Foundation Prize, for his extraordinary achievements in cosmology. But what is more, there's one more ace in his sleeve. He is a Catholic priest. I wonder, and this is one question that we had from one of our leaders, whether if we would have extraterrestrials here coming to the world, would you decide to baptize them and convert them into Christianity? Maybe we'll talk about this today. So with us, Professor Michał Heller. Wonderful to have you here online as well. And of course, you can also see Artur Chmielewski here. Let me also introduce to you our guests here in the studio. On my right, I will start with Andrzej Dragan, who is a physicist, but also an artist. He's a photographer, composer, filmmaker, a professor at the Faculty of Physics of the University of Warsaw, and a visiting professor at the National University of Singapore, a self-professed atheist. I think you are the one who has remade the Catholic Church catechism into quantahism. That's something I'll ask you about a bit later. On my left is no other than Professor Krzysztof Zanussi, a world-renowned film director, but also a person who represents the organization who is the organizers of today's event, CTN Foundation. So thank you, Professor, for organizing this incredible discussion. We also know that apart from your great love to movies and filmmaking, you are also a philosopher. You are also interested in physics. So I'm sure this will be a fascinating discussion. And last but definitely not least, Professor Krzysztof Meissner, who is a professor of physics at the University of Warsaw in Poland. He collaborates very closely with Nobel Prize laureate Sir Roger Penrose. I heard that Sir Roger actually makes pancakes when you meet and you talk about cosmology and you talk about the universe. So I'll ask you about this in just a moment. But before we start our discussion, I want to turn back to our first speaker, Artur Chmielewski, with a first question, and then we'll ask our other guests to ask more questions to what you've already said. My first question to you, Artur, would be the following. We just heard yesterday news that there's a big asteroid coming in the direction of Earth. It's not the first asteroid, but this time it seems that the likelihood of a collision is less than 0%. It is 1%, 2%, we don't know yet. It's a huge asteroid. But tell me, looking from the point of view of NASA, do you think these kind of potential existential threats that come from space, do they change the way we perceive the world? Do they change the way we perceive ourselves? And how do you actually in NASA take on these kind of news that surely many of us fear?
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for inviting me here. I feel very privileged. Privileged by the challenge of answering so many interesting questions about space and the privilege of being with so many distinguished personalities here. So thank you so much. And maybe I should be asking questions because it seems there is so much expertise in the studio and out there in the internet land that maybe I should be asking questions and taking notes. If I can contribute something, I will. For example, well, I can tell you how we look at the asteroids and upcoming objects here on potential collision course. We always have to be very precise that and warn everybody that this object is just on a potential collision course. That's not going to happen. We don't want to cause panic. Stock market drop.
So we can sleep well.
That's right. Although I have these exercises with students when I sometimes go to colleges and high schools, I ask them, okay, what do you think would be impact on the world if we knew that, and they have to draw out of their hat different scenarios, that the asteroid is tiny, the asteroid is big, it will destroy California, it will destroy one continent, it will destroy the whole planet, and it's coming in 3 months, 3 years, 30 years. How is it going to change life on Earth? It's a very interesting question. The impact is psychological, economical, right? Technological. I mean, would all the world's money and all the efforts go into saving the planet, right? Would we? One benefit, I think, of this would be that for the first time, the whole world will be focused on working together to solve a problem.
You know, Artur, looking at the pandemic, I'm not sure if even a disaster of the pandemic proportions, we sometimes weren't able to look eye to eye and work together. I wonder if an asteroid would actually make that difference. Professor Heller, please tell us, what do you think?
Hi, Artur. I have a question, actually, which is very, I think, crucial. Namely, we know that in the past, the space exploration was the source of enormous technological breakthroughs and so on. What is the technological breakthrough that you would think would be a game changer, that would really change our perceiving of the cosmos, the space exploration? What would be something that you would wait for that would really change the whole game of what we are looking forward, what we are expecting from the space exploration?
So actually, these two questions, the first question and the second, maybe could be combined. Because definitely we're watching the space all the time. We have telescopes mapping the asteroids, any upcoming objects, any objects in the orbit that is changing. And there are a lot of them. There are chunks of asteroids. Of course, comets are very unpredictable because they puff out jets all the time and change their trajectories. So it's very difficult. And as a matter of fact, there's a JPL team led by somebody who has Polish descent, Jan. He's, I think, was born in Canada, truly international man, but he leads a team of experts who are looking at what's coming to us. Because, you know, people think, oh yeah, there was an asteroid 67 million years ago. It killed dinosaurs, but that's such a long time ago. It's so unlikely. We don't think about it. But if you are at night and you look at the moon, what do you see on the moon? You see craters, right? The first thing you see is craters. And so how did these craters form? Well, from impacts from asteroids and comets, right? And we are in the same statistical neighborhood as the moon. It's just that we don't see these craters on Earth as much. Well, there's one in Arizona, there was Tunguska, right? There was Chelyabinsk, and there was, of course, Yucatan Peninsula. But we don't see this, but Earth gets impacted by these asteroids all the time, just like the moon is. So, we're going to get hit sooner or later. Is this sooner 200 million years or 67 million years or 67,000 years? We'll see. But certainly, the discovery of an asteroid on a collision course with Earth would change our perception in space and our importance of space. What else? Well, certainly discovery of one microbe, one bacteria, or some living organism. And we are looking for, of course, NASA is looking for life everywhere else beyond Earth. That would philosophically change our view of the universe. It would mean that probably statistically, again, the universe is teeming with life. Now we think that that's probably the case based on statistics and how life originates the way we understand it. But we don't have a proof, right? So everybody can have his own theory and is agnostic.
Yeah, so you're saying two things, a asteroid on a collision course with Earth, and of course, finding any proof of living life would be a game changer for humanity. I wanted to turn here to Andrzej Dragan, who also has a question to ask to you from the studio.
Thank you, Artur. It was very interesting to listen to this beautiful introduction, but I have a little bit of a comment. So you mentioned a lot of side effects of the space race that we are involved in, but there is one more tiny reason why we actually need to go to space, and that's because we owe it to the fish. Our ancestors, who millions of years ago were involved in great sacrifice to leave the oceans, crawled out of the waters to inhabit the lands. It was paid with countless lives and suffering, and only because of that suffering we are now able to walk the earth, enjoy the fresh air, and only because of that, only because of those sacrifices. Otherwise we'd be still sitting in the oceans. So I guess the only way to pay that debt now to the fish is to do the same, just to explore the outer space. And on the more serious note, I think the main reason to do that is not because of those side effects that gives us technology and the reasons to, to expand our technical abilities, but it's rather to fulfill our curiosity. Because this is why the fish crawled out of the sea, not to create technology, but to fulfill the curiosity. And we have to do the same.
Thank you, Artur. A short answer, 2 minutes, because we have an online question coming up.
It's very interesting that you bring up oceans. Oceans are very important. Water is very important to life. There are 3 things that are required. We know that for sure for life. That's water, hydrocarbons, and energy, right? Water is one of them. So oceans, right? And this is what has changed in the last few years, 10 years, 15 years. We always thought, oh, gee, looking at Earth, 2/3 of our planet is covered by ocean. Well, no wonder that this is such a nice place to live, right? And all the other places we look at, Venus, it's a terrible place with sulfuric acid and temperature, right, and pressure. And Mars is fairly dry. But it turns out there's plenty of water. And we even have a program now called the Ocean Worlds. And we're sending probes to a lot of places in the solar system just because we discovered that there is this water. It's just this water is not in the oceans that are on the surface, but frequently in a lot of moons and such like Europa, Ganymede, and Enceladus. It's all hidden underneath ice. But there are these huge undersurface oceans. The ice protects it from radiation. There's water, there are hydrocarbons there, and there's energy from all kinds of volcanic events and friction and other things. So we know that there's water, energy, protection from radiation that is deadly, and energy in so many more places in the solar system and universe than we thought before. So oceans are definitely very important.
So we owe it to the fish, but also to the oceans. Thank you, Art. And we have one more question coming up. This time we're connecting with the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. We have Stacy Wong with us, who wants to ask a question. Stacy, please.
Thank you for your presentation. And here is my question. The greenhouse gases in the atmosphere of the planet Earth require a major correction. So what can scientists learn in space exploration that can help other scientists to have a paradigm shift in our atmosphere? For example, leading them to think out the box.
Excellent. Artur, did you hear the question? The question related to something so important to us today, the prevention of further climate change. How can NASA and the technology you're using help us to counteract this huge existential, to some extent, challenge that humanity faces?
So what is wonderful about my organization is that, yes, we are famous for sending men to space. We're famous for these rovers on Mars. But actually, a lot of this technology is used for our daily benefit and for understanding our planet. It's doing things for the benefit of our planet. For example, most of my career at NASA, I worked on interplanetary probes, to Jupiter, to Saturn, to comets. Right? And it's really fascinating because everything you learn is absolutely new, something that we speculated, thought about, but never knew what really is the truth, right? But then now I'm working on for example, on a mission. It is fascinating for a different reason. This is truly an important mission for humanity. And this is one of the very few Earth science missions that I've been working on. And this is called Oasis. And a lot of people don't realize, but NASA has many, many satellites in orbit that investigate Earth and climate change, which is extremely important. The mission Oasis that I'm working on and will be maybe launched in about 5 years, we'll be looking at a couple very important things that deal with climate change. One, we're going to use technology that we've developed for Mars. We talked about it, that we are looking for water on Mars and has life existed on Mars, right? That was an interesting scientific question. But now we decided to use the same technology to look for water under Sahara Desert and Arabian Peninsula. So these are very water challenged areas, right? And we don't understand how much water is there. There is water under Sahara, right? Extremely important humanitarian question. I mean, just imagine if this whole region where 500 million people live will start running out of water, and it's starting now. The deserts on Earth are getting drier, and the icy regions and wet regions are drying out also. And the same mission will also look at the melting of the Antarctic ice. So the sea level rises because ice melts, right? So that's a question that we have to understand. How much of this ice will melt? How much water will go into the ocean, and the ocean level will rise? And what people also have to think about that as the ice melts and ocean level goes up, oceans have a lot of salt. So as they impinge on the coastlines and on land, they also start contaminating the fresh water supply. So this is one of the climate change consequences, which is really severe, that water that we need so much, and again, we talked about oceans just a few minutes ago, water is essential to our life. And we're going in a wrong direction, contaminating it and not using it properly and not protecting our planet. Mm-hmm. So NASA observes a lot of parameters from space of our planet and tries to improve all the climate change predictions to help humanity.
Thank you so much, Artur. This is really excellent. Thank you for being with us in this first part. I think we've learned that NASA is not only responsible for space explorations, it's not only responsible for the growth of our economy, but we see now also a very growing role in trying to help us face the challenges we have here on Earth, yes, without space exploration. So, Artur, thank you. to you. And we move on now to the next speaker of today's program. I've already introduced him to you, Father Guy Consolmagno, who will give us a short introductory remarks, and which will be followed with a discussion with our experts here in the studio.
Hi, I'm Brother Guy Consolmagno. I'm a Jesuit brother and an astronomer. In fact, I'm the director of the Vatican Observatory. The fact that I'm here in a clerical collar with my MIT ring tells you that it is possible for one person to be at the same time both a fanatic and a nerd. The fact is, I'm something of a fanatic when it comes to my science and a bit of a nerd when it comes to my church. The fact that I do both can seem surprising to people. And sometimes I might get the question, why do I believe in God as a scientist? I want to turn that around. The question isn't, why do I believe in God? But why do I believe in science? Because I do believe in science. That's a brave thing to do nowadays when people try to throw up doubt about science, but I believe in it. And I believe in it so much that I'm dedicating my life to being a scientist. But why? What actually is the science that I'm doing? You know, astronomy, the study of the sky. A cynic might say, no, your astronomers don't study the sky. They study what other astronomers have said about the sky. And there's a lot of truth to that. I spend a whole lot more time reading papers or going to talks or overhearing what other people have talked about in their studies than actually looking at the sky myself. Does that mean that I'm just believing a lot of things that other people have made up and I'm making up more things for other people to study after me? Are we actually really getting to the truth? Why do I think that there's truth in the astronomy I'm doing? I use the word belief in my science, and I do that for a reason, because science is a system of logic, and every system of logic has to start with axioms. They have to start with things that you assume before you can even do the science, just like a syllogism has to start with a major. What are the axioms that you do when you do science that you believe without even thinking about it, that fundamentally are religious axioms? One, you've got to believe that the physical universe actually exists. It's not just an illusion. I'm not just a philosopher dreaming that I'm a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming that I'm a philosopher. I believe that what I am studying is real. Secondly, I have to believe that the universe actually makes sense in a logical way that can be described by laws. And not all religions believe that. The ancient Greeks and Romans, they believed in gods that threw lightning bolts. If you see a bolt of lightning, you don't work out Ampere's law in Maxwell's equations. Instead, you say, the god of lightning threw the bolt. Explains everything you see. And there's no way that you can test that that's wrong if your fundamental assumption is the universe is full of nature gods. But if you refuse to believe in nature gods, maybe because you believe in only one God, then you've got to come up with some other explanation. But you also have the room to say that there are laws, that there are other explanations to come up with. And the third thing you have to believe is that it's worth doing it. That instead of going out and making lots of money or fathering as many children as I can, instead I'm going to spend my life studying the physical universe. Where do I get this from? I get it from my scripture, from the book of Genesis that says God created the universe deliberately, step by step, in a logical way, every moment of the day, saying it is good. And at the end of the period of creation, created the day of rest, the Sabbath, to give us time to appreciate this universe. But then I could be a poet writing poems about the universe. I could be an artist painting the universe. All of those things are good things. Why am I doing it as a scientist? Why do I think I'm going to get truth doing science? Where does my faith in science come from? Does it come just from authority? Because my teachers told me that the science works? For a lot of us, that's certainly where it starts. Do I say, science, I believe in it, I've got faith in it because it works, it gives me the right answer? That's a kid's answer. That's the kid who thinks that science is getting the right answers in the back of the book, that science is nothing but a big book of facts. So that's not science any more than playing scales is playing music. We use these science books to get us up to speed, to teach us how to do the science. But the science itself is an adventure involving things that we don't know, things where we don't know if we're going to be right. So it's got to be more than just it works. Experiment, repeatability. We can do something in the laboratory and we always get the same result. You ever been in the lab? That never happens. There's always something goofy that goes wrong. You probably have even saw that when you were a student trying to make the right answers in the lab. The fact is that when things go wrong in the lab, we spend a lot of time trying to chase what went wrong because we are fundamentally assuming that there's a reason for it to go wrong, not just that, the nature gods were nasty that day. Where do we get that faith? What is an interesting way to attack this is to recognize that the things that give me confidence in science, what counts as strong evidence for a given theory, what gives me a belief that I'm on the right track, are the same tools that we can apply to our faith in God, that we can say, this is why I believe in God. Have you ever changed your mind? Have you ever admitted you were wrong about some scientific idea or theory or something else in your life? What did it feel like? What made you do it? What gave you the impetus to say, no, it's got to be more than that? There are things in science that give me confidence that my science is right or encourage me to find something better. One is a wider applicability. If I have one solution that solves one problem that suddenly solves 5 or 6 others, then I can say to myself, maybe there's something going on here. If it's repeatable, not just that I can go to the lab and repeat it, but that other people studying the same problem have come up with the same answers over and over and over again, that gives me confidence that I'm doing something that's right. But there's another element that any scientist will tell you about, after a couple of beers and it's late at night. And that's a scientific theory has to be elegant. It has to be beautiful. It has to fit together like a beautiful machine or a beautiful painting or a beautiful piece of music. Some people reduce this to Occam's razor. The simplest solution is the best. But where do you get the idea of simplest? What's simple to one person is complicated to another. It's a human instinct. It's that human feeling that, this is so gorgeous. There's got to be truth in here someplace. And so that brings me back to my original definition of what's astronomy, the study of what astronomers have learned about the heavens. Because astronomy is ultimately a human conversation. It's a conversation among thinking, feeling, emotional, but rational people looking at the universe, searching for understanding, searching for beauty, searching for joy. But like every good conversation, it's open-ended. It involves more than one voice. There's no one right answer. There's no one place where you say, solve that one. Don't have to look at that anymore. You continually revisit in the light of new things that you've seen. And why do we do it? We do it for joy. We do it for love. We do it for the truth. And love and joy and truth are the markers of the presence of God.
Thank you so much, Father Consolmagno, for making the argument that science may be an act of faith. We have our first guest here in the studio that has a question to you. Andrzej Dragan, please.
Thank you. So I have been a quantum scientist for over 20 years, and I must say I have no faith in science whatsoever. And you know why? Because science doesn't need my faith at all. Because the fundamental principle of science is to doubt, is not to have any faith, is to disbelieve and question everything you can question. This is what is basis of science. Science is founded in doubt. And you don't need to believe in anything, really, if you want to do science. And another reason why science does not need your faith comes from St. Matthew, who noticed that you can actually judge, you should, or is it reasonable to judge things by the fruit? So let's try that. The fruit of science is that since the onset of science 400 years ago, it resulted in us naked apes landing on the moon, building a quantum, well, almost building a quantum computer, performing quantum teleportation, doing all these marvelous things. And as a side note, building internet, computers, Facebook, all these things. So this is another reason why science does not need your faith. You can judge by the fruit. This is enough. It's just working. And there are no absolute truths in science. Axioms that you mentioned can change overnight, which happened with relativity, which happened with quantum theory, and we just realized our axioms were wrong. We changed them overnight. And there is no reason to think it won't happen many, many times in the future. So we don't really have a reason to have faith in science. It just proves its worth itself. And as much as I understand your intention to blur the lines between religion and science, I don't think it's really necessary, because having faith in science is really unnecessary, if not inappropriate.
So
it's an interesting point you make. Actually, Paul Tillich, a famous theologian, wrote at length on the necessity of doubt in faith. But what he said could actually be summed up by an American writer, Anne Lamott, who said the opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. If you were certain, you wouldn't need the faith. It's precisely because we're not certain, precisely that we do have doubt, but we have a belief that we can resolve those doubts and learn something more. That's the faith that we need. I'm not even talking about a faith in God. I'm talking about a faith in the process. Furthermore, the reasons why we as human beings want to do the science are reasons that go beyond the functionalities, the sorts of things you're talking about. You're talking about technology. And technology is lovely. I'm delighted to have technology. But technology is not the reason why we do the science. It's one of the lovely fruits of it. But again, the same science that gave us these marvelous technologies has also given us worldwide pollution, climate change, and abuse of the environment. In the past, they gave us, the horrors of World War II. So you can't look at these fruits and say that justifies. There were people who would say this justifies not doing the science. Oh my gosh, there are things we shouldn't have known because it gave us the atomic bomb. I think that functional view of the universe is a very narrow vision that neither inspires us to look further nor allows us to appreciate the joy that we have when we do look further.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Father Consolmagno. We have another question here from Professor Meissner.
Hello, Guy. So I fully disagree that we don't need faith in science. We have to believe that there are laws of physics. If there were no laws of physics, anything else would be completely futile, and if scientific research will be completely nonsensical. So we need a faith that there are laws of physics behind or below everything what we see. That's a faith that we have. The second thing that I would like to defend the Greeks. You said that Greeks and Romans had lots of gods and so on. Without the Greeks, we wouldn't have science. They made two absolutely fundamental contributions. One of them is abstraction, that whenever I have 3 and 4 and 5, there will be a rectangle, there will be a triangle with right angle. It doesn't depend whether it is a silk or a rope or whatever. So abstraction is a fundamental thing. The second is Plato, that we have ideas that are objective, that are eternal, that are absolute, that are that beyond something that we see, there are ideas only, and these ideas may be laws of physics, but they have to be there. Otherwise, our observation would be just an observation, nothing else. The science is possible because we have objective ideas behind the world that we see, and that's what the Greek gave us. So I would like to defend the Greeks.
I will go even further in expressing that the even greater thing they gave us was the room to ask the philosophical questions, the space to say, not only how does it work, but why does it work that way? And so obviously we could not have done the things we do without the Greek philosophers. The Romans gave us marvelous technology and a big enough, stable enough economy that we were able to apply this technology. Roman science really was mostly Greeks working for the Romans, I have to confess. And being an half Italian myself, I recognize it's not one side or the other. The mathematics that we got from the Hindus was essential. But also the philosophical setting in which we do the science is essential, because science ultimately is the activity of human beings. And if we don't have human beings able to talk to each other and giving each other the room to ask the questions and to question the answers that others have had, then science doesn't happen.
I feel also Andrzej Dragan wants to give a counter argument here.
So in his famous quote, Albert Einstein said that the most incomprehensible thing about universe is that can be understood, that it is comprehensible. So it seems that it surprised him that universe has some laws that we can understand. So this is not really our fate. We don't need to have faith that those laws exist. It's our discovery that there are some laws of physics. And by the way, we are not entirely sure whether this is completely true. For example, in quantum theory, there are no laws of physics that can predict every single outcome of any measurement. Right? There are situations in which there are no laws of physics predicting given situations. And this is our discovery. So we happen to discover that not everything is governed by a law, and we just have to accept it. We don't have to have a faith in that. We just study how it is and just accept how it is.
But if it was completely random, we wouldn't make physics. That would be completely nonsensical.
Of course, but this is our discovery that universe happens to be possible to be described in physical laws. Not our faith.
Not only that, you wake up in the morning and you know that the sun will be there, that you can walk because the laws of physics didn't change. Our existence is based on this faith that the laws of physics are universal in time and in space. That's an absolute fundamental faith that we have. We cannot predict that in an hour or so everything will change, because being a physicist would be a nonsensical profession if I assume that every hour something changes and it's completely chaotical.
I would say that we just discovered this. This is the discovery. We don't know why.
Absolutely. Professor Zanussi, here from a more cultural perspective.
I wonder what is my perspective, but I hope I don't break the rules of this debate. If I address you, Professor, as a priest, not necessarily as an astronomer, because you provoked me because you quoted Book of Genesis. So I wonder, what is your intuition? How would you explain creation of man as a final act? Is there any room for evolution that would lead us to some better species than humans? Or is it absolutely closed question?
I'm never going to tell God what God can do or not do. And my joy as an astronomer is to look and see. But in the human being and in any other entity in space that has the traits that the philosophers of the Middle Ages described as intellect and free will, self-awareness, awareness of others, and the ability to make free choices. Those are the traits of the soul. Anything else is artificial, whether or not you've got a white beard or 27 tentacles. That doesn't matter. It's this ability to recognize your own existence, your own awareness. In creatures like us, the universe itself has become self-aware. And of course, we're going to grow. Each of us as individuals grows and changes. The story of Genesis is not the story about creation. I just took the best science of the Babylonians that was around at the time. The story of the Genesis is about God. And it's about how God deliberately chooses to have entities like us who are self-aware and who, the climax of Genesis is not the creation of human beings. That's only the sixth day. The climax is the seventh day. when we can make the discoveries, when we can ask the questions, when we can enjoy the argument.
Thank you so much. And we now are connecting with our online audience. We have one question. Mrs. Anna Białas, a graduate of both Harvard and Oxford University, has a question to you, Father.
Thank you guys so much for sharing your thoughts with us and reminding us what science really is about. It's an adventure that involves things we do not know about, learning from when something went wrong, and never settling on the right answer at the end of the book. Guy, in your talk, you mentioned three axioms of science: the belief that physical universe exists, the belief that the universe makes sense in a logical way that can be described by laws, and the belief in the work of doing science. You call them fundamentally religious. I would like to ask you how people without faith can do science and discover the truth. You also say that your motivation to study the universe comes from the book of Genesis. If you were to wake up tomorrow without your faith, would it still be worth doing science? Thank you very much.
Guy, the floor is yours.
Right. It actually happened when I was 30 years old, and I was a postdoctoral fellow at MIT. And I lost my faith in science, not that I didn't believe in the science anymore, but I didn't believe it was worth doing. I looked at the world and said, there are people starving in the world. Why am I wasting my time worried about these ice-covered moons that we heard about earlier? So I quit science, and I joined the US Peace Corps. This was long before I entered the Jesuit order. The Peace Corps sent me to Africa. I wound up not only teaching at the University of Nairobi, but also I wound up talking to people up country, and I had a little telescope, and they would look through the telescope and they would see the rings of Saturn, and they would go, oh, wow. And they would say, what do we know about them? What have people told us about them? What have we learned about the rings of Saturn? And I realized it didn't matter if they were remote villages away from the nearest university, or students at the university, or my friends back in America. As human beings, we all had the same curiosity and the same delight, because we didn't live by bread alone. The thing that makes us human is this curiosity, this not being satisfied with the answer. And so that, to me, makes me realize that that is key to anyone who's doing science, whether or not they want to use the word faith, whether or not they want to use the word religion. The funny thing is that most of the scientists I've encountered since I became a Jesuit, and they said, oh, you go to church? Let me tell you about my church. A lot of us are churchgoers, but even beyond that, all of us believe in truth. We would not fake the data to get ahead and think that that was good science. All of us look for the joy that comes from doing the science. Otherwise, we'd stop doing it and we'd go work for a bank and, wind up being able to buy a nice sports car, maybe. At the end of the day, though, and again, I'm quoting a Jesuit theologian, Michael Buckley, to be an atheist means you have to have a very clear idea of the God it is you don't believe in. And there are a lot of versions of God out there that I don't believe in either. I only believe in one God. So I'm very close to the atheists. We're not that far apart. And the God that I do believe in, though, is a God for whom truth is central. Beyond that, why would I be a member of the Jesuit order? Why would I be a scientist?
Father Consolmagno, thank you so much for being with us. It was fantastic to bring in also the question of religion and faith, how they interlink, although we might not have all agreed that science is an act of faith. But I think it's a very important perspective to our discussion. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we move to the final speech of this part of the masterclass, which is a speech prepared by Professor Michał Heller. Panie profesorze, the floor is yours.
The importance of the question about the meaning of life need not be justified. It is one of the most important questions that exist. Related to this question is another one. Does the universe make any sense? They actually pose one big question. After all, it is the universe that generated the human being. The information that makes us who we are has been inscribed into our genes through long evolutionary processes, tightly woven into other cosmic processes without which it could not exist. The question of the meaning of human life and of the meaning of the universe are but two faces of the same question. Is the universe a blah blah blah, just a sequence of processes without any meaning? Far from it. And let's do a little experiment. And suppose we want to enforce the universe to do something stupid. Something which was not included into its program or into its initial conditions. So for instance, I pick up a stone and throw it in any direction and with any force, completely at random. I did something that the universe did not know in advance and could not have predicted. But as soon as I threw the stone, the universe incorporated it into its very structure and made it move in a very organized manner. Its trajectory is a solution to Newton's equation of motion, and the initial conditions for this solution were determined by my hand, giving the stone specific direction and specific velocity. Everything that happens in the universe is subject to mathematical laws. The universe is mathematical or mathematically rational, as we are used to say. Even what we call chance is integrated into laws of mathematical calculus of probability. Everything in the universe is mathematical. We usually consider the property of rationality as an element of meaningfulness. In this sense, the mathematical rationality of the universe can be regarded as a manifestation of its meaning. We can call this aspect of meaning the cosmic meaning or cosmic sense. Of course, the human being participates in the cosmic sense because human being is himself a part of the universe, and the human history is but one of the fibers of the cosmic process. However, when we are speaking about the meaning of life, we are asking for something more. It's not enough for us to be a part of a mathematical blueprint. It's not enough for our body and our conscious brain to function according to the mathematical laws of the universe. Our point is that our existence should have the meaning just like words or sentences have meanings in the language. In this context, we can speak about the existential meaning or existential sense. It is logically quite possible for the universe to be cosmologically meaningful, that is rational in the mathematical sense, but devoid of any existential meaning. It is logically perfectly possible. However, logically possible does not mean cognitively satisfactory. A mathematically organized universe with a precisely functioning conscious brain as part of it, but devoid of any existential meaning, would be something dangerously close to contradiction. Through the senselessness of human existence, the absurd would infiltrate into the rational structure of the universe. Let us then consider the other possibility. The existential meaning of the universe and that of human being remain hidden for us. We still do not know exactly what it is, but if we accept its existence, the universe is no longer an absurdity, but a mystery. Mystery in this sense is not an excuse of our ignorance, but rather an opening up to a rationality that transcends our capacity. It is obvious that with the eyes of religious faith, things can be seen in the world that are invisible to the scientific method. For the believer, the universe is not only a set of physical or biological processes, but is also the work of a rational being, of God. This entitles us to assign to God a purposeful and meaningful action in analogous but not identical sense in which we speak of a meaningful action with regard to rational human activity. However, we must always take into account that this purpose may partially or completely go beyond our cognitive abilities. In the religious perspective, every person, from beginning to end, is immersed in environment of meaning and in environment of mystery. But in order for that meaning to be my and not God's meaning, I must choose it and try to make it real in my life, always, even when the light of meaning ceases to be clearly visible.
Professor Heller, thank you so much for bringing to our discussion a very important question, the meaning of the universe. Why are we here? Why does the universe exist itself? We already have a number of questions we want to ask you, and I'll start with Professor Zanussi here.
Thank you very much. Well, Reverend Professor, I say Reverend because you're also a priest, what is quite remarkable. And you spoke about rationality and sense. And there is no doubt that reason is a principal cognitive instrument of human mind. But what about another instrument so deeply rooted in various religions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and others? This other cognitive instrument may be called mystical experience. And where do you situate mysticism? Is it complementary to reason? Or is it contrary to reason? Or is it irrelevant for the reasonable mind?
I think that, as usual, things are much more complicated. Let us notice that there is another word than mysticism, which is closely related to it. I have in mind the word contemplation. It's an aspect of mysticism. And my point of view is that in doing science, there is a lot of contemplation. That is to say, there is a lot of mysticism of a special kind. It's interesting to notice that the word contemplation is a Latin translation from the Greek word theory, theoria. And what is more, Plato believed that the human soul has an insight into the world of forms, into the world of ideas through the theoria, through contemplation. And I think it's not just a chance that the word theory has such a magnificent meaning in science. Science is all directed to find out new and better theories. So we contemplate the universe in that way. In doing science, it's part of mysticism. And take, for example, the attitude to science of Einstein. It was full of mysticism. We have alluded even today to the praise often repeated by Einstein that the most ununderstandable thing in the universe is that it is understandable. This is a true mysticism. And as far as the mysticism in the religious sense is concerned, I must admit that I have a lot of skepticism with regard to it. I think that in many cases it is just an exaggeration, and everything can be explained with the help of psychology, which does not contradict the fact that God can use natural causes to speak to humans.
Thank you very much, Professor. And again, bringing the physical and the spiritual, which at some point actually come together. Professor Meissner wanted to say more about this.
Witaj, Michale. I would like to, in a sense, bring in the question of Gödel theorem. Namely, it says, of theorems, they say that there can be infinitely many sentences about the world that are true but unprovable. Therefore, maybe the existential meaning of the universe is one of those, that we can understand it, we can, in a sense, it's true, but it's unprovable. What is your opinion about this fact that we can say or we can formulate infinitely many sentences about the universe that are true but unprovable? What is the way actually to say whether they are true but unprovable or they are unprovable but wrong?
I must say I like and admire your way of contemplating the universe and science, but I would prefer more, more humble approach to Gödel's laws. The Gödel's theorem refers only to axiomatic systems. And science as such is not an axiomatic system. So Gödel's theorem refers to some small part of science which can be formalized, in which we can distinguish initial axioms, rules of inference, and then theorems, and then we can say that there are some unprovable things within that system of axioms, provided it is rich enough. But I think that I like to think about mathematics as a huge field of mathematical structures. Field in a similar sense like physicists say about gravitational field or electrical field. So it is not a system of logical system, it's something different. So mathematics will be a field of mathematical structures, and if we have axiomatic system, we cut off from that huge field just a small part, and then all paradoxes can arise, of which the theorem said. I would willingly expand this this idea, but I think it's not time for.
But you always emphasize that the world is mathematical, that's a fundamental property of this universe. Therefore, if it is mathematical, it should be subject to Gödel's theorems.
Firm belief, as Guy would say.
Excellent. I know Andrzej Dragan wanted to give us a short remark and a question.
Thank you. So if you take a piece of paper, much bigger than this one, and fold it in two, and then fold it again, and again, and again, each time you double the number of sheets, and pretty soon you'll end up with a pretty thick stack of paper sheets. And if you ask anyone, what is the thickness of that piece of paper after you fold it 50 times? A typical answer is that it may be 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters, while the correct answer is that the thickness of that paper will be equal roughly to the distance between the Earth and the Sun. So us humans are painfully wrong about the simplest possible questions that only involve the ability of multiplying by 2. This is already too difficult to most of us. And what about smart people, like the smartest alive, Albert Einstein, the smartest who ever lived? So essentially, there are two types of questions, easy questions and difficult questions. And science is only about the simple ones, the simplest possible, because these are the only ones that we can even try to attempt to answer. And an example of such a simple question is, what happens if you empty the entire universe, leave only 2 infinitely small balls, and let them move? What's going to happen? These are the questions that physics can ask. And in fact, this question is worth of a Nobel Prize. Like 4 years ago, after the discovery of the gravitational waves that were the effect of collision of 2 black holes, those waves were detected. And this is exactly the problem I described. What happens when you have 2 infinitely small points that move around? So these are the questions that science can ask. And this discovery was announced by the press as the huge success of Albert Einstein, who was the father and mother of relativity. And the irony is that Albert Einstein did not believe in the existence of black holes. He doubted the existence of gravitational waves, although both of them are natural logical consequences of his own theory of relativity. He also doubted, and he was wrong about that the universe is expanding, although this also was a consequence of his own theory. He questioned that the humanity will ever use nuclear power, although only a few years later we had the explosion of the atomic bomb. Because of his beliefs in how the nature should be, he was also completely wrong about quantum theory. So we are talking about one of the greatest minds that ever lived, who was constantly wrong about extremely simple questions within his own area of expertise, which is shocking. But this only shows how easy we make mistakes. And that's why science is built on doubt. And here, you are addressing very, very hard questions, the hardest possible, about the meaning of life, about the origin of the universe, about the nature of God. Don't you think that us daring to ask these questions and hoping that we have anything relevant to say isn't just a sign of our being naive or arrogant?
First of all, I fully agree with you that the task of science is to ask the simplest possible questions. For instance, the question out of which the modern physics was born was the question about how the stone freely falls to the earth, to the ground. It was Galileo and other people who investigated that point were able to isolate a simple question from the entanglement of many other phenomena in the world, and they were able to give an answer because it was so simple question. And this is a seed of modern physics. And if we compare that, for instance, with what happens now in neuroscience, people have to face a huge complicated system like our brain, and it is very hard to isolate the phenomenon which would be a counterpart of a falling stone, something very simple. So it's not always possible to have such a simple point. Nevertheless, we start to have such simple points. This is one of my comments. The other comment is that the fact that the greatest scientists were sometimes wrong, were very often wrong. Sometimes they were right. This fact corroborates my faith in a rational universe. Why? It was, I think it was Hertz or Maxwell who said that equations are wiser than those who wrote them. And this is really the case as far as Einstein equations are concerned. They are huge, very beautiful equations. I always admire the structure, and which is inexhaustible, in fact. And we now know a lot of solutions to Einstein equations, but there are many, many more than we know. And the case with black holes, with gravitational radiation and so on, this is just an instance of that rule that equations are wiser than those who wrote them down. And I also agree with you. It is a wonderful thing, by the way, that I just notice that I very often agree with my opponents. I agree with you that the questions like meaning of life and meaning of the universe belongs to extremely difficult questions, and this is why they do not belong to science.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Professor. Our time is almost up, but we have one more question, this time an online question coming from Simonetta Raski from McKinsey & Company, Switzerland. Simonetta, are you with us?
Good evening, Mr. Heller. Thank you so much for being here with us. To be honest, I'm not very familiar with all the fascinating work you created, but already reading a couple of articles, I found them very interesting. If I understood correctly, like throughout your life and still now, you are trying to answer like major question of our existence. I was wondering, which are those big questions that still remained unanswered for you, and how are you trying to go about them?
It's a good question about important questions, and I don't think there exists a catalog of important or big questions. And if we find out an answer to one of them, we just mark them out and go to another one. This is far more complicated than that. Answering big questions or even formulating them is a process. It's a long process. I would compare this process to reading a fancy book. When you approach to the end of the book adds a new pages, and this process never ends. So if you are closer and closer, if you believe that you are closer and closer to the answer to one of the questions, the new big questions are generated and the process keeps going on. And I think this is exactly what distinguishes big questions from simple questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Heller, for being with us. I wanted also to thank our marvelous guests here in the studio and those who joined us online for this part one of intensive and extremely important discussions on the question of space exploration, the meaning of the universe, the questions of religion and science, where do they interact? But this is only the first part of our masterclass. Now we will take a short break, 10-minute break to refresh. In this 10-minute break, we will present to you also our partners who made today's masterclass possible. A whole heartfelt thank you to these partners, of course. And after a break, we will meet another set of fantastic speakers. We will meet Professor Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia University. We will connect with London with Kate Raworth, who is the author of the Doughnut Economy book. And last but not least, our artificial intelligence expert, Mike Walsh, who will tell us what awaits us and whether artificial intelligence can predict the future. It has not predicted our pandemic. So let's see what is in stake here. Ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you for being with us in this first part of our masterclass, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in just 10 minutes.
Hello, my name's Tom DeVries, and I'm the president of the Global Leadership Network. And I want to say how excited I am about raising the bar of leadership in all sectors of society. See, because the need for good leadership is everywhere. See, the leadership we know is not enough, and we need to have new strategies and a new generation of leaders. Humility makes it possible for us to hear and to grow. With enough humility, the older among us can learn from the younger, and the younger can learn from the older. See, leadership is influence. Everyone has influence. You have influence. I hope that you would invest in your own leadership. Everybody wins when leadership gets better.
I would say the vision of the World Youth Alliance is of personal excellence. You see all of these young people from all around the world. They care about others. They care about the world.
We all have the same mission because we all want to change the world. We all want to change our societies.
Everyone's talking about human rights, but no one knows why they're protecting them.
They're looking for answers. Who am I? Do I actually matter?
It's definitely an urgent time to point out those inconsistencies in our different ideologies and show that we need to be consistently affirming the value of human life at all levels. Otherwise, we all become vulnerable.
Organizations like World Youth Alliance have to exist because there's a constant need for someone to stand up for the little guy, the person that has no voice, and that's what World Youth Alliance does.
We stand together or we fall together. This is why our main duty is to build a vision of tomorrow. NASA's plans for a manned mission to the moon in 2033 or to Mars in 2043 are important. But what is even more vital is our desire to start fresh, to start anew. Let us start dreaming again. This is exactly the message of the organizers of today's masterclass, which is Poland's CNT Foundation and the Vatican Pontifical Council for Culture. This introduction makes it easy for me to present the main idea of the second part of the masterclass, which will be centered on the new vision of man. Where do we go from here? And this new vision has to center around such values as brotherhood and relationships between mankind, values in economy, and a greater attention to environmental protection with the help, among others, of artificial intelligence. So our first speaker is no other than Professor Jeffrey Sachs, an economist from Columbia University. Professor Sachs became famous as the economic advisor of governments in the post-Soviet countries after the collapse of communism and at the time of the political transformation of the region of the 1990s. At the age of only 35, he was the economic advisor of the Solidarity movement in Poland, headed by that time by the Nobel Prize laureate Lech Wałęsa, who later became Poland's president. Today, we are counting on you, Professor, to advise us on how to overcome the really existential societal questions, such as exclusion and social inequalities, that are really remain a huge disease of the 21st century. Professor Sachs, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Sachs, university professor at Columbia University and president of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And you are pondering the big question, what do we want for the future and how should we change the economic system to achieve the future we want? That phrase, the future we want, is actually the phrase that the governments of the world adopted as they met in 2012. 20 years after the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, where they had adopted treaties on climate change and on protecting biodiversity and on fighting the spread of deserts. And they met 20 years after those three treaties in a pretty grim meeting that I was at, once again in Rio, saying we're not getting the future we want. The economy is not delivering for humanity. We're not even achieving those three environmental treaties. What they agreed in 2012 is something quite important, and that is to adopt the framework of sustainable development to reshape the world society and the world economy. The governments negotiated for 3 years, and then in September 2015 adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. 17 goals directed at priorities such as ending poverty, ending hunger, ending gender inequality, reducing inequality of income, and fighting human-induced climate change. And then a few weeks after adopting the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the same governments got together and adopted the Paris Climate Agreement in December 12th, 2015. And that said, all governments should take decisive actions to stop human-induced global warming and to aim to keep it below 1.5 degrees Celsius warming compared to the pre-industrial average Earth temperature. Now, the reason I think that this is significant, both of these agreements reached within a few weeks of in the fall of 2015, is that sustainable development is the kind of holistic framework we need for our world. You know, the world is buffeted by so many stresses, huge gaps between wealth and poverty, social exclusion, and multiple massive and growing environmental crises, climate change, mega pollution, loss of biodiversity, pandemic diseases like COVID. And we need an approach that says We need a holistic society in which people are not left out, indeed, in which now billions of people are really left out. We need a society that is organized to protect nature because we depend on it. And we need a society in which the scourges of poverty in the midst of great wealth are attended to. Now, for me, it was quite moving that Pope Francis opened the session on September 25th, 2015, in which the 17 Sustainable Development Goals were adopted, because Pope Francis issued a wonderful encyclical, Laudato Si, earlier in 2015, where he called for that holistic approach, what he called integral and sustainable human development. And in Laudato Si, Pope Francis says that our interdependence globally obliges us to develop a common plan for our common home. He says we're so interdependent, we will not survive unless we and thrive unless we have that common plan. His most recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, also emphasizes the need for cooperation, for the encounter with strangers, for the respect across cultures. So you put together Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, it's a very powerful guidance, an ethical, moral guidance for this notion of sustainable development, which means prosperity, social justice, and environmental sustainability for the whole world. Now, as an economist, I work every day on this set of challenges and believe that we have the wherewithal, we have the technologies, we have the wealth, we have the capital, we have the skills to achieve sustainable development for the world. We're so rich, actually, that even the 2,700 billionaires on the planet and their $13 trillion of wealth, just those handful of people, 2,700 people, could finance a tremendous amount of the investments needed to end poverty, end hunger, end the tragedy of children without places in school, ensure universal access to basic health services, to ensure clean water and sanitation, and the like. There's no justification whatsoever for this material deprivation and social exclusion in a world with the technologies that we have, with the know-how that we have, and with the wealth that we have. Indeed, that kind of deprivation and social exclusion is not only morally wrong, it is practically devastating. It leads to conflict, to unrest, to instability, to refugees and displacement that have such adverse consequences for the whole world. Now, the basic point I would emphasize as an economist is that a free market system will not get us to the future we want. Sometimes I'm associated with, quote, free market reforms, but I can assure you I have always believed in a mixed economy, what's sometimes called a social democratic ethos, where markets and government and civil society coexist and cooperate so that we do not get mass inequalities of wealth and income, so that we do not have social exclusion, so that we do not have environmental destruction. A market system by itself will not ensure that kind of inclusion, that fair distribution of income, and certainly not the environmental sustainability. For that, we need clarity of goals, and we need to see our public sector as an expression of our collective will, politics for the common good. And one of the most pressing and important aspects of the common good today for all of us in the world today and for future generations is to transform our energy systems from fossil fuel-based energy systems to zero carbon energy systems so that we stop this ongoing and tremendously damaging and even more threatening human-induced climate change. We also have to make massive transformations in how we use land, how our food is produced, how it's processed, how it's transported, how the global supply chains work so that we're not destroying the habitat, the rainforest, the other ecosystems that are so crucial for well-being on the planet. We are, I believe, in the process of creating a new global ethic in which across cultures worldwide, we have the shared understanding about the need for this kind of social inclusion, social justice, economic rights, and environmental sustainability. We are forging, I believe, it's hard, it's step by step. There's a lot of forces fighting it, but we are forging a new kind of economy in which wealth is better shared, in which wealth is better redistributed, in which every human being is afforded the dignity and the economic rights to ensure that dignity, and in which we absolutely ensure that nature is protected and that our technologies are used for the common good, not for geopolitical confrontation or competition or conflict. So I greatly appreciate the chance to share these thoughts with you. Please join the sustainable development effort. Please organize your thinking around the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement and the Convention on Biological Diversity to protect life on the planet. If we act together, we can achieve the future we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sachs, for what I think fundamentally was a very optimistic message. Let me cite you here. You said we have the necessary means, the technologies, the wealth, the capital, and the skills to achieve sustainable development for the world. So I guess really it is in our hands to make that difference, to attain these goals. Thank you, Professor Sachs. Before we move into our discussion with our guests here and before I will introduce them, please let me allow us to connect with yet another online speaker, which is right now in London, Kate Raworth. Hi, Kate, are you here with us? I see you. Great to see you here. Hello. In his book, Let Us Dream, Pope Francis invokes women economists. He says that women actually promote an economy that is geared not only towards growth and profit, but also one that is more inclusive and people-centered. And you, Kate, are one of the women that actually Pope Francis points to. You are the author of the book Doughnut Economy. The book in 2017 found itself as #1 in economics in the list of the Financial Times. So it's a true honor to have you here, Kate, with us. And let's start with a few words from you, opening remarks, and then we'll move into discussion with our studio and our online audience. Kate, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and it's an honor and privilege to join this masterclass. So as Jeffrey Sachs was saying, we have the resources and the technology and the means to transform the world. What I want to add is that we need the mental models. We need the understanding of the direction we want to go to make that possible. And I'm going to talk about it under Doughnut Economics. So let me start by taking us to the 20th century economics that I think we all need to leave behind. I was a student in the 1990s of economics, and I believe these ideas are still too influential today. The first image that is often taught is the image of supply and demand. That puts the market at the center of our vision. It means price is the metric of concern, and anything that falls outside the price contract gets called a market externality. Well, we are now witnessing the near death of the living world, and we cannot go around calling that an environmental externality. We must begin with the essentials of life, not let them be treated in the margins. Then there's the selfie, the portrait of humanity at the center of traditional economic theory, and that is rational economic man. If he was drawn, he'd have to look something like this. He would be a man with no dependence, standing alone, with money in his hand, ego in his heart, a calculator in his head, and nature at his feet. He hates work, he loves luxury, and he knows the price of everything. This is merely a model of humanity, but it actually changes students. The more they learn about this model of man, the more they say they value self-interest and competition over altruism and collaboration. Who we tell ourselves we are shapes who we become. And if we are to thrive as 10 billion people together on this planet, we need a far richer portrait of ourselves that actually nurtures the best in human nature. And then there's the goal. The goal of mainstream economics is so deep it's often unspoken, but we need to make it visible. It is the idea that economies succeed by pursuing endless growth measured in GDP. And that's no matter how rich a nation already is. I'm sitting here in the UK, one of the richest countries in the history of humanity. And yet our politicians and economists believe that our success here, like elsewhere, depends upon yet more growth. We need to move away from the idea that success lies in endless expansion. And I believe these ideas and many others have actually contributed significantly to the crises that we now face at the beginning of the 21st century, from climate, from financial meltdown to climate and ecological breakdown to COVID lockdown. These crises may be reported differently, but they all emerge from systems based upon endless expansion. And they hit with sharp inequalities of gender and of race, of wealth and power, of global north and global south. We need a new vision of an economy that actually supports and enables us to thrive. And for that, I offer a donut. It's the only one that turns out to be any good for us. So the goal here is to leave nobody in the hole in the middle, falling short on the essentials of life. And these are drawn from the Sustainable Development Goals' social priorities. So all the governments in the world have already agreed that every person in the world has a right to live above that social foundation. Leave no one in the hole. But at the same time, don't overshoot the ecological ceiling, because that is where we put so much pressure on the life support systems of our planetary home. We kick our planetary home out of balance. We cause climate breakdown and ecological breakdown. So the goal of the donut is to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. If that's the goal, we are very far from that, as all of the red in this image shows. It shows us extent of human deprivation falling short in the whole, and it shows us the extent of ecological degradation already overshooting those planetary boundaries. Now, this is a global picture, but we can bring it down to the level of nations. And this clearly shows us that every nation in the world must transform. Malawi needs to eliminate that human deprivation without overshooting planetary boundaries, as all countries before it has done. China and many others like it have a double whammy of human shortfall and ecological overshoot. And the United States has massive ecological overshoot, and we know there is human deprivation in the midst of plenty. To me, this image tells us that no country in the world should call or consider itself to be a developed nation, an advanced nation. We are all on journeys of transformation. And the last century's economic theories and government policies and business models will not get us there, because they weren't designed to solve this. We need new theories, new models, new visions, and new policies of our own to turn this story around. So where should we begin with 21st century economics? I begin never with supply and demand. I begin with a big picture of the economy, recognizing that the economy is embedded in society, embedded in the living world, drawing on Earth's materials, putting out waste, bathed in a river of solar energy. The economy is a subsystem of the living world and must be compatible with it, must be conducive to life. But then dive inside the economy. And there, yes, there is the market, where we may be consumer, producer, capital, or labor. That is the space of the old economic thinking, but we must add to it. As Jeffrey Sachs, I think, was strongly pointing out, we must add the important role that the state plays as public servant or resident voter or protester. These are all important roles that we each can play in relation to the state. 20th century economics focused very much on the market and the state, but we must add now sectors that were really neglected but fundamental to our provisioning for our wants and needs. The household, where we all begin every day as parent, partner, relative, or child, caring for each other, that space of care that is unpaid but invaluable. And the commons, where people come together to co-create, share, steward, and value what they co-create. Again, often unpaid, but crucial. We must nurture in ourselves all of the values that enable us to operate well in each of these ways. They call upon us with very different values and behaviors and relationships. And I believe to thrive in the 21st century, we must nurture all of our social abilities to do these relationships well, to provision for all of our wants and needs. Then let's think about how we actually turn this story around, how we eliminate the red from this picture. I believe we need to put two dynamics at the heart of our economies, becoming regenerative and distributive by design. We've inherited degenerative economic systems that run down Earth's life-supporting systems. We take Earth's materials, make them into things we want, use it for a while and throw it away. That is pushing us over planetary boundaries. We must turn this into regenerative economic systems where resources are not used up. They're used again and again, far more carefully, collectively, creatively, and slowly. Some examples from around the world, very local examples I'm bringing to show that this is possible at the level of a community, a village, a town, whether it's regenerative agriculture in New South Wales, Australia, or a sponge city in Kunli, China, where the water is absorbed into the city. These are places that are reconnecting with the cycles of life where they are. Or on the technical material side, circular construction in the city of Amsterdam, where materials must be used again and again, and getting fossil fuels out of transport in city centres worldwide. These are just the beginnings of the regenerative revolution that we need, and that must become normal everywhere. Add to that the fact that we have inherited economic dynamics that are often divisive by design, capturing value and opportunity in the hands of a few. And many 20th century companies, businesses were designed precisely to do this. We need instead to turn these into distributive designs where value and opportunity is shared far more equitably with all who co-create it. And again, we can look at examples from the very level of streets in cities, from solar microgrids in Kenya, microgrids of energy that are owned by the community that operates and depends upon them. Rapid transit in Curitiba means transport is affordable, accessible, and fast, even for low-income workers. This is a democratizing transport and mobility. Affordable housing in Vienna, where over 60% of people live in housing that is owned by the city, because the city long ago decided that housing is not an investment asset for the wealthy. It is a human right for all. And then in Togo, open design, using open hardware, the commons, the creative commons of open source hardware and software, bringing the digital revolution to communities that would have to wait far too long if they relied upon the market alone. Some very grounded examples of distributive design that need to become far more widespread everywhere. So let me pull back and say that to change the future and to turn this story around, we must transform the dynamics of our economies to become distributive and regenerative by design. And I invite everybody in this masterclass to think at the scale of their own city, their own enterprise, their community, their school, their university, their country. What would it look to turn these dynamics into the normal dynamics of where we live? Let me finish by saying I want to pull out and say goodbye to 20th century economic thinking. It does not serve us in this century. And it's incredibly exciting to me to know that many young graduates and thinkers and doers are putting 21st century economic ideas at the heart of their own enterprise and innovations. an economy that's in service to people, in service to life, nurturing human nature so that we meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. We at Doughnut Economics Action Lab are working with innovators and pioneers around the world to bring these ideas to life, and I do hope that you'll join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you for bringing these fascinating mental models into the discussion. I think one thing you said at the very beginning stands out specifically. Who we tell ourselves we are is who we become. So we really are in a constructivist nature. We can shape the world around us through changing our mental models. We will move into questions to you right away, but let me first introduce to you and to the entire audience our incredible guests here with me at the studio. On my right, I'll start here with Dawid Grzegorz, who is the director of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Poland. He's an economist. He is a political scientist. Before coming to Warsaw, he actually led the Santiago office of CAS in Chile. Dawid, it's great to have you here with us. On my left, on the other side, is Bartosz Kuźniar, who is a philosopher, translator, essayist, who is also very interested in the philosophical dimension of contemporary economics and economy. We'll talk about this more. You are the author of the book Night of Numbers, in which you make a number of controversial points. I hope some of them will come up in the discussion. You say, and I think you agree here with Kate and with Jeff very much, that contrary to what we managed to start believing with time, man was never the aim of capitalistic logic. And we'll talk about this in just a moment. And last but not least, with me in the studio here, Jacek Kędzior, who is a managing partner of EY in the region in Central Eastern, Southeastern Europe and Central Asia. That's quite a vast geographical region, but also managing partner here in Poland. He is an expert in management, but that's not the reason we really invited him here. We invited him here because he truly understands the importance of values in economy and in life in general, and made these points several times throughout his career. So welcome, Jacek. I will start with the questions right away, and the first question, I understand, comes actually from David. David, the floor is yours.
Kate, many thanks for your fascinating approach. I was asking myself, how can we now implement these these mental models for the politicians? How can we convince them? Because when I observe the global landscape carefully, then we see, from my point of view, a competition between basically three models: the state authoritarianism of China, the platform capitalism of the United States, and more or less a welfare system of the European states. And how can we integrate these models into a broader landscape, and how can we convince politicians to really look on the issues you mentioned: more equality, distribution, caring for the global common goods, and really to think broader than the mere economic facts?
A wonderful question. I think many politicians are very aware that the old frames and the old methods that they've been using, the old values and political visions they have stood for, do not serve these times, and they do not take us into the future we need. They are leading either to massive social shortfall or ecological overshoot. And I hear in the speeches of many politicians them searching for a new language and a new way of framing what we should be standing for. At the same time, I find the most persuasive way of engaging with politicians is not to try to persuade them. I've never tried to persuade any politician. I find they're most persuaded when they see their own peers, other mayors, other ministers, other governments, already starting to take this action, already starting to put it into practice. And so we at Doughnut Economics Action Lab focus on working with the pioneers who already want to do it, because I think they are the most powerful advocate for change and showing that it's not only inevitable, it becomes irresistible. And lastly, between the three models that you shared, I think there is another opportunity. I think we need to harness the platforms. The digital platforms are not going to go away, but they need to be transformed in their ownership and their financing and their service so that they are more like cooperative platforms or platform cooperativism rather than platform capitalism. And let me just come to say that I think of any technology that we use, we can question it against these 5 design traits. What is its purpose? How is it being put into practice and what is it in service of? How is it networked with other technologies, with its customers and its suppliers? How is it being governed? But most crucially, how is it being owned? Because this profoundly shapes how it's being financed. And I use these 5 design traits actually with city institutions as well to ask, is deep transformation underway? Not just looking at the dynamics of regenerative and distributive, but are we seeing deep transformation in the design of institutions? Because only then will we really begin to reorient our institutions on a very, very different path.
Thank you so much, Kate. We move now to Bartosz Kuźniarz with his question. Bartosz, please.
Okay, I think it's quite striking how optimistic both of these presentations were, especially given that we all know that we live in very depressed times and we live in a culture that keeps fantasizing about the end of the world but is simply unable to create even the most humble utopias. And now we get these 2 presentations where the glass is certainly half full. Jeffrey Sachs was telling us about this new global ethic that is already developing, right, based on social inclusion, environmental responsibility, and so on. And you obviously gave us this wonderful vision of an ecologically and socially sound economy. But I guess I wouldn't be true to my profession, and I'm a philosopher, if I didn't say that I think there's a certain blot on this rosy landscape, and it is directly related to the question of who we are, of what we really want, of the question of anthropology. And when I hear you warning us or admonishing us to stay in the donut, to stay in this cozy Holocene home of ours, right? You tell us that we should not, under no circumstances, overshoot the planetary boundaries, or else we will end up in some catastrophe. I feel tempted to say that, well, this is all that we have ever done as the species that we are. Humans are beings that overshoot boundaries. And in philosophical jargon, you have many, many terms for this. You can call it death drive. You can call it transgression. I prefer to call it being toward infinity, but it doesn't really matter. These are all the same. They mean the same thing. Those categories. And I don't think it's possible now to expect that people will start to all of a sudden define themselves in some defensive way as beings that, I don't know, don't drive SUVs, don't take long showers, etc., etc. And if I may say one more thing, I think this is precisely what many of the greatest stories that we have in our culture tell us about ourselves. Adam and Eve lived in paradise, and then they just had to overshoot the boundary that was given to them. They ate the fruit, right? Plato, in his Symposium, he tells us that love is the desire for the external possession of the good. So this is who we are. We are beings that are larger than life. And I think this is an anthropological constant that we always have to include in our calculations about the future. And I'm not really sure I found it in your presentation or in your book, which I have, obviously, I have read.
Wonderful points. Yes, humanity has what you called a death drive, a desire to consume and push. And I think, again, who we tell ourselves we are shapes who we become. And if you look at the sources of Western economic thinking and a lot of Western philosophical thinking, this is written in. John Stuart Mill said in Political Economy, We treat man as a being who desires to possess wealth, and that wealth was seen as insatiable. So we've described ourselves this way, and we create ourselves this way. I think there are other ways that we also are. In reality, there may be a death drive in some, but others focus on caregiving and repair and keeping us within boundaries. And I think it's very, very clear that we respect and we value those boundaries when it comes to our own health. If you are a parent raising a tiny child and that child's temperature goes above 40 degrees, we don't say, this is wonderful, she's breaking out of the boundaries. We do everything we can to bring the child's temperature back down. We know within our own bodies, which are living complex dynamic systems, that life depends upon balance, a balance of temperature, a balance of food, a balance of exercise, a balance of oxygen. Now, we sometimes push it to the limits, but if we want to stay alive, we come back within those limits and we recognize that is what thriving is. To me, it's a profound philosophical question as to whether we can take what we already know at the level of the human body and take it to the planetary body. I will also say that I think this is a very Western philosophical cultural discussion, and there are other indigenous cultures that say we are founded upon recognizing our interdependence with the land. The writer Robin Wall Kimmerer, for example, who wrote a wonderful book called Braiding Sweetgrass, talks about the honorable harvest. You never take the first and you never take the last and you never take more than half. So there are principles in other cultures that actually profoundly respect the need for balance and don't at all have a death drive written into them. So I think it's a very Western question of, can Western culture and society and norms that have evolved to think that we should break through boundaries, and this is how capitalism has accumulated and succeeded, can we reinvent that and rediscover something informed by other cultures? I want to come lastly to the point that you said it's a very optimistic or rosy presentation. I'm certainly presenting the possible. Not that I'm optimistic, but because I believe if we don't present what could be possible, there's absolutely no chance we'll ever make it happen. So if we say it's too late and we are too many and we are too driven to overshoot, we probably make that come true. So in part of a much broader set of change makers, I choose to stand in a place of speaking continually to what could be possible and what would enable us to thrive, because I think there are, as many people are driven by a death drive, there are equally as many people driven by a desire to regenerate and restore life. It's all up for grabs, all in the balance as to where that goes.
Thank you, Kate. We have really just a few minutes, and I wanted to bring one more question from the studio here and one online. So my big request is to keep the questions and answers this time a bit shorter. So Jacek, please, the question. I know everybody, when you were talking here, truly agreed. They were nodding with you, and I think Jacek wants to also relate to some of these things you said.
Thank you very much. So I come at this a little bit a different perspective. We are currently in the time of pandemic, post-pandemic. We have probably unprecedented experience for our generation of a year and a half being in this situation. Yeah? And what I can see, talking to the clients, meeting entrepreneurs, I can see how big impact it has on a business. On the one hand side, I can see, organizations started to consider their purpose. What's their purpose? I can see the change in style, leadership style, management style. I definitely see the people becoming at the center of the organization, not to talk about labor shortages in a number of places currently, especially in services. So my question would be, how do you, looking at this situation, this experience, how this will actually impact, the evolution? Because I see more and more humans being actually in the center. And that is actually maybe one positive outcome of this experience that we had for the last year and a half.
And Kate, if we can really take a minute and a half to answer, so we still can bring our online audience here.
Absolutely. So I will say that I think it's fantastically important that companies are looking at their people and, as you began, looking at their purpose. And I'm just going to go back here and say, with every enterprise that we work with, we believe that we need to redesign business models for the 21st century. Every company needs to be asking again, what is our purpose? what are the networks that we move in? Our suppliers, our employers, our customers. How do we relate our values to them? How do we govern ourselves? But crucially, for companies, how are we owned? Because how we are owned, whether it's by a private entrepreneur, a family, the state, the employees, capitalist markets, the shareholders of venture capital, this will profoundly determine what finance is doing, whether finance is in service to this purpose or extracting value for the shareholders and the owners alone. So I believe these are times for redesigning the kinds of enterprises that actually exist and thrive in the 21st century. That we will not get there if we don't redesign business.
Thank you so much. And we have now one question to you coming up from Alice Hendricks from the Global Leadership Network. She's the vice president of that network. Alice, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to delve deeper on this topic, the new vision of a man in regards to leadership. A key value of the Global Leadership Network and all of its activities and programs is everyone wins when leadership gets better. Now, of course, leadership is formed and expressed by women and men working alongside others in various contexts with opportunities and limitations. So, regarding the topic, the new vision of a man, I have a two-part question I'd like to ask of Kate Raworth. The first part is, what kind of a person and what kind of values will be essential for the next generation of leaders in order for them to serve people, communities, and countries in a time of rapid change? The second part of the question is, what can we as leaders of today do to identify, connect, and support the future leaders?
Thank you very much. And actually, sorry, Kate, we have another question coming up. I was told just a moment. So let's listen to another question, this time from the University of Cambridge. So closer to you, definitely. Adeline Di Maggio has a second question to you. And we'll come back with to you to answer both of the questions.
My question is about the new economy to Kate Raworth. And I was wondering in which way the new economy is humanizing, as in takes into account the dignity of the individual rather than their economic potential.
So two questions on leadership and how do we promote good, sustainable leadership, and of course the question of dignity of humans in the model you're presenting.
Great, thank you. Wonderful questions. So on leadership, I believe we've inherited models of leadership that were very hierarchical, with a pyramid, with a leader at the top. This isn't the way that leadership actually happens. I think models of far more distributed leadership, where many people are leading within different areas, connecting and collaborating, is a far more effective and democratic and distributed way of evolving the ways that we work. But in that leadership, again, I would say recognizing that some companies try to transform or try to say we're going to do business differently because we're going to have purpose-led leadership. We need to redesign the institutions that we are part of because they need to allow the leadership to be transformative. If we are stuck in business models that capture value for shareholders, where finance is on quarterly reports, no matter how enlightened a leader is, they are going to be continually performing to quarterly reports. And we've seen it in leadership from people like Paul Pullman of Unilever, from Emmanuel Faber of Danone. Eventually they clash with what the company actually is designed to do. So leaders need to be backed up by new business enterprise designs. And let me just come to the second question, that as I was showing with the 4 different sectors of the economy, we need to recognize our many roles. We may be a consumer or producer, but we're also a voter, a protester, and a public servant. We are a parent, partner, relative, a child, a commoner, a stewarder, and a sharer. And I think 20th century economics very much focused on the market-based characteristics and the values and attributes and norms that cultivated that. It's crucial that we recognize our roles in the household and in the commons, and these must come back. These skills and values must be nurtured again. It's a long journey, but we need the language of being commoners, of sharers and repairers. We need the skills and the principles of doing that well. We're only just beginning to learn this again.
Kate, thank you so much. First, thank you for a fantastic presentation. I think thought-provoking, and in the studio, I felt that we mostly agree on your arguments. There is a sense of urgency to change the way we live, the way our societies function, and most importantly, how the economy delivers sustainable development overall. So, Kate, it was a pleasure for us to have you. Thank you so much, and all the best to London and the UK.
Thank you.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, we move to our last speaker and to a topic that I think is equally fascinating, the question of artificial intelligence. And believe it or not, but actually in a research we learned that 50% of EU citizens think that political leaders could be and should be replaced by robots. So it seems we're starting to trust artificial intelligence more than we trust our leaders today. And Mike Walsh, who I hope is just joining us here, knows a lot about artificial intelligence, and I hope he will able to answer the most important question that we will try to pose in the discussion to come is, can artificial intelligence help us save our planet? Can it make us better or not? So, ladies and gentlemen, with us here, Mike Walsh, the floor is yours, Mike.
Hi, it's wonderful to be speaking to all of you today. Although I do need to be honest with you about something. On reflection, the last few years have not been a great time to have been a futurist. Probably wouldn't have been fantastic if your job was a psychic or an astrologer either. As you might expect, I get asked a lot, how is it that you failed to predict COVID-19? And it's true, I completely missed the pandemic. But in many ways that wasn't my real mistake. I think my real mistake was underestimating the capacity of some kind of external event like a coronavirus, having the potential to not only change the world as we know it, but essentially to bring this world of 2030 forward a decade to today. And if you think about it, that's exactly the extraordinary position we now find ourselves in. Although interestingly, I don't think it's the first time we've had a civilization scale event like this. You see, if you go back 100 years to the Spanish flu of 1918, what's really striking are not just the similarities with today in terms of face masks, social distancing and quarantines, but the similar set of revolutions, economic, social, political, cultural, that were also unleashed by that virus. I'll give you a simple example. So many men had either died in the previous war or had fallen sick from the virus that during this period, women were forced to take increasing positions of responsibility and authority. This, more than anything else, set the stage for the universal right to vote some years later. There are also big changes in technology. Take a look at this ad from the New York Telephone Company advocating the benefits of this disruptive new device known as the telephone, perfect for staying in touch with friends or colleagues that might be trapped in quarantine. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking this ad came out in 1918, but it in fact came out during the cholera outbreak of 1910. You see, by 1918, so many of the human operators and switchboards had fallen sick from the virus that telephone companies were begging their customers not to use the telephone for fear they might overwhelm the network. It's a timely reminder that then, as now, even in a moment of accelerating technologies, the key question to understand the shape of the future is not technology but anthropology. Rather, what is the true potential of human beings and human intelligence? That's what I want to talk to you about today. And if anything, the crisis has really just forced us to now consider what the real value of human beings is and how they need to evolve and adapt in a world that's going to be increasingly shaped by machine intelligence. For me, the place to start this story isn't necessarily you and I, but to think about the next generation, the people that are really going to live in the future. Now, I'm sure many of you are too young to have kids, but those of you that do, look at it this way. This generation are going to be radically different than any other before us. Sure, we know how to use mobile phones and tablets, but they not only grew up with them, they grew up in a world in which all of their experiences have essentially been shaped by data. Think about it. Kids don't listen to music. They listen to Spotify. They don't watch television. They're on YouTube. They don't hang out with their friends in person anymore. They're on TikTok or Roblox or Instagram. In other words, as this generation grows up, all of their experiences are going to be shaped by this new world of artificial intelligence and AI-powered experiences. And this already is having very big consequences on the future of work, the future of jobs, the future of employment. Many people are asking themselves, is this the end of the road? Do we still need human beings? Will there be human financial advisors? Will there be human engineers? Do we need people? Well, I want to make the case that not only are we only at the beginning of the story of understanding the potential of human intelligence, this is just the beginning of really understanding how we're going to be augmenting our capabilities with these new technologies too. I mean, if you look back in history, you realize we've been having these debates for some time. In the early days of the Industrial Revolution, people were fearful about the impact of automation. I mean, look at the cotton industry. When they first started bringing automation to this industry, the weavers were upset. I mean, here were machines designed to do their work. But interestingly, many of the weavers didn't lose their jobs. Their jobs changed. Because rather than doing the physical work, their job was now maintaining the machines that did the work for them. But as a result, their productivity improved, the quality of cloth improved, people started buying more cloth. And between 1830 and 1900, which was the peak of the Industrial Revolution in America, the number of people in this industry didn't go down. It in fact quadrupled. Something very similar happened in the financial services industry. Now, can you imagine if I was actually speaking to you and you were a big association of bank tellers and it was the late 60s, and I, as a late 60s futurist, was telling you that there's this amazing new technology known as the ATM, the automated teller machine. I don't think you would have been excited. You would have been in living fear and existential dread. Yes, it was true. You didn't now need as many human beings to work in bank branches, but this just meant it was cheaper to open up bank branches. So banks did just that. They opened up many more banks in many more places in many more formats. There are actually more bank tellers today than there were before the ATM. But that's not really the point. You see, you need to hire a different kind of person now. Someone with different skills, someone who create great experiences for customers. This is the question we often fail to ask. It's not, will technology destroy jobs and undermine potential, but rather, how will it change jobs? And what new capabilities and new potentials does it force us to unlock? What I think this means in an even bigger scale is that we need to become a new kind of leader. We need to become algorithmic leaders. And when I say algorithmic leaders, I don't mean that we have to learn how to program, but rather we need to evolve and adapt for this new algorithmic era in which machines and artificial intelligence is so core to the way we deliver value. In particular, I think we're going to need two very different sets of skills. On one side, we need a deep understanding of human complexity, the ability to know how to empathize, to motivate, to incentivize. But we're also going to need some machine-type skills as well, or the ability to think computationally, to leverage data and technology to augment our own senses. So what I think going forward we're going to need is a new set of principles to guide us as we go on this new journey of human discovery. I want to share a few of those principles with you. The first principle, I think, is, like I said before, we need to get better at understanding the impact of technology on jobs. In a way, we need to learn how to find the new job inside the old one. Almost every profession is going to change with the result of more computation, more artificial intelligence. I came across this wonderful story when I was researching my book of an astronomer who was at the University of Austin, Texas. His name was Andrew Vanderbilt. And one day Andrew got a call from an engineer at Google known as Chris Chalou, who said Google was looking for more interesting data sets to apply machine learning to. And he suggested that maybe they could use the data set from the Kepler telescope. So the two of them built an artificial intelligence or a machine learning model to find exoplanets, or large planets that are like Earth but in other solar systems. And in doing so, after training this for about a week, they set this loose on the data and they started to find planets that had been completely missed by traditional astronomy and methodologies. It was really the birth of a new kind of profession, the computational astronomer. But the truth here is that in the future, we will be looking at the skies not with our eyes, but through the lens of algorithms and data. And you're seeing this kind of revolution of every field, whether it's archaeology or astronomy, architecture or accounting, even art. A great friend and colleague of mine is an artist by the name of Refik Anadol. He's a data sculptor. He actually takes live data sets, whether it's from musicians or conductors or even earthquake data from the Los Angeles, and feeds us into these incredible digital architectural models. Whatever your profession is that you want to go into, whatever career you want to pursue, the question you have to ask yourself is, what happens if you add artificial intelligence, data and computation to it? Can you not only reinvent your own possibilities, but find an entire new profession that never existed in the past? The second rule I want to share with you is don't work, design work. One of the most important things that we have to do in the future is not to do jobs as the way they used to be, but ask ourselves, is there a smarter way of doing this? This is a fascinating fellow by the name of Josh Browder. He was originally a student who came from England to the United States to study. He got a whole bunch of parking fines when he was studying, but rather than pay them, he stayed up one night and wrote some code to basically automate challenging all those fines. He managed to get off all of them. And so he thought to himself, this is great, other kids could use this. So he launched it as an app known as Do Not Pay. In the last few years, hundreds of thousands of fines, millions of dollars have been transferred from governments back to teenage drivers. It's really an incredible lesson, isn't it? Because rather than just trying to work hard, essentially Josh was profoundly lazy. He didn't want to do things in the normal way. He thought about how could you use technology to actually challenge the way things have been done in the past. And that, I think, any employer in the future is going to be exactly the kind of person that they would want to hire. The third principle for me is, if the answer is X, learn how to ask why. There's no doubt in this new age we're going to face increasing threats, not only cyber attacks and data breaches, but the risk of growing AI bias and algorithmic discrimination. An important part of being a leader in this new era is not just understanding technology, but understanding the deep ethical issues at the heart of these systems that we have to design. Even if you're not an IT person, as a business or ethical leader, these are the debates you're going to have to take part of. Because the future is not inevitable. The future we get is the one that we choose to live in. And a big part of that are the ethical discussions and debates that we need to have about privacy, about rights, about inequality. And that, more than anything else, is an essential part of being a human leader. So, like I said to you, I think we're going to need a whole new set of leadership principles to guide us in this new world. I shared 3 with you quickly, given the short time we have. I've actually got another 7. They're all contained in my book, The Algorithmic Leader. It was recently published in Poland, but if you'd like some more information as well, you can find it on Amazon. If you scan this QR code with your phones, it'll immediately link you to some more information about the book and also the audio version. I hope you find it interesting. But what I really want you to take away from my short talk with you today is really the potential that exists in this new era that's coming. Often when it comes to artificial intelligence, we ask ourselves, can we cut costs or even cut jobs? But the more interesting question for me is this: what is now possible in an age of AI that was simply not possible before? You know, it's been wonderful speaking to all of you, and I'd love to stay in touch. So take a minute to follow me on Instagram or on Twitter. But what I really want to share with you is the very simple idea. We are at the dawn of a new world that's going to run on very new rules. And while for many of us are trying to imagine what this means for the future of our jobs and the future of our potential, what I want you to remember is that ultimately the world we live in is going to be up to us and the decisions that we make now. Because now is the time for us to reimagine how we engage with our customers, our clients, our communities. Now is the time for us to redesign how and where we work. And now is the time for us to reimagine our role as leaders. Because now, more than ever, is truly the time for transformation.
Thank Thank you very much, Mike. It was a fascinating lecture. Before we bring you into the studio, let me first have a short discussion with the gentleman here. Jacek, what were your thoughts when you were actually looking at the number of different points that Mike was making? He talked about the inevitability of artificial intelligence as part of our lives, that the new generation is going to be basically raised in this virtual world, and it's going to see the world through completely different lenses. But we will also look at space, and we are already looking at space through really data, not through our eyes, yes, through models. So what were your first impressions?
First of all, I just realized that we are at the very beginning, although I see how technology is actually already transforming a number of the organization. And I think what we are observing probably in the last couple of months, the accelerated pace of a transformation of a lot of organization. And that is driven predominantly by the technology. And that is something incredible, the pace, to the extent that I'm asking myself a question, whether we can really speed up. Because there are natural limitations. I think when I look from the perspective of the big organization, our clients, I see the human element is so critical for the ability to actually implement the change and be able to create an organization that is still going to live and is going to be positioned for the future. So I see this pace of change.
So you're afraid it's going too fast, yes?
I think it's going fast. I'm not maybe afraid, but I'm just thinking that there is a human aspect in this, how much we are able to cope with the change and the pace of change. And that is probably the reflection I would have.
Thank you so much. Bartosz, from a philosophical perspective, are we human beings really wired to such a huge evolutionary change? Because evolution has been done for thousands of years. These were very small steps, basically not felt even in a generation, yes? Many generations had to pass for us to learn new skills, acquire new talents, move from into the agrarian society and so on. And now the last 100 years have been the space that Jacek is talking about. Can we really cope with this as human beings, and also with a world that's so different, that also is ruled by different principles that we know from the non-virtual world?
Yeah, I'm not sure. When I was listening to what Mike Walsh was saying, I was thinking about this broader historical perspective. And because what he is saying, it's basically the intelligent machines are not the enemy. They are our opportunity. But actually, he's talking from within the current system. And I understand we can make more money using those machines, not even 10% more, but 10 times more, right? That's great, and I think it may very well be so. But I wonder what is the long distance perspective here, and I have this nagging feeling that we live in a world that more and more explicitly tells us to just get rid of our bodies. Because consider this, the economic system could be much more efficient if it wasn't hindered by this reactionary body that we have. We have to sleep, we have to eat.
We have to drive to work,
Our reactions when driving are really slow. So this is, and I think that's why we have to try to so desperately enhance our performance by different pills, apps, and all those tools that we use. And I want to ask Mike Walsh what he thinks. What does he really think about this? Where is this taking us? So that's my question. And
Excellent. Excellent. Mike, are you there? Did you hear the question? Maybe you can answer it right away. So if you heard here, Bartosz, he was not as optimistic as you are of what we can do with artificial intelligence and a world that is so digitalized. He's actually very pessimistic about where the long term is taking us and whether we are capable actually to adjusting to that world in such a short time. Mike, welcome with us again.
It's great to be here. I think truthfully, if you really push people, we're all kind of pessimists in a way. It's just what we're pessimistic about. I am a big believer in the potential of tools like artificial intelligence and automation to make work and life better. But I think I'm also very cognizant of human nature and ability to really ignore the potential of these world-changing platforms, even though they're right before us. I think the biggest risk we face, and this is really the divide, is are we going to go into a world in which these tools empower us and make work more meaningful, or are they going to basically usher into a new era of greater surveillance, greater breaches of privacy, and work that's essentially more monitored? One of the things I wrote about in my book is that there's a risk that you have a large percentage of the world that essentially end up working for algorithms. So they're like Uber drivers, people who are in Amazon factories stacking shelves, and a very small percentage of people who've got the knowledge and expertise to work on the algorithms. And this, to me, is a recipe for revolution, and not in a good way.
And Mike, what do you think about this idea? Also, Bartosz said a moment ago that maybe our body will become irrelevant to the process, actually unuseful. More important, it will prove that the environmental devastation that comes from our existence in this real world versus a digital, if we were able to move our minds into the digital. Is that science fiction to you, or you think that's something we might see happening at some point? We being frozen and our minds living in an artificial world, a computer game, let's say.
Someone was asked about something similar once, and they said it's a bit like trying to worry about traffic on Mars before you've even built settlements there. I think there's a whole host of potential terrifying outcomes, but I'm not a great believer in the singularity. I don't think we're going to upload ourselves into some digital metaverse. I'm more concerned that in places in the world like South Korea today, they've had to build onto the pavements street signs because they can't expect people to look up to see whether there's a car coming. That's a real world problem. So is digital addiction. So is, Instagram. We talk about inequality a lot and the importance of redistribution. But the fact is, the inequality we have in this world is not the inequality that necessarily comes from not having food to eat or places to live. For a lot of us, it's the fact that we see on Instagram lifestyles that we wish we could have, but we're not prepared to work for. And that's creating incredible psychological stress.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mike. We have David here with us as well with a question to you.
Mike, I really liked your optimism, but in my mind were coming the voices of Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking, who really emphasized the risks of AI technologies. And my question is, how can we deal with the risks of that technologies? If I understand AI right, it's about patterns, it's about data analysis, it's about machine learning, and how can we manage the risks which are coming with these new technologies?
I'm a big fan of Elon Musk, but you have to be careful with any quote from him because he loves trolling people to get a response. The truth is, artificial intelligence is not some embodied personality waiting to take over the world. It's a set of tools. So the worries we have are not with artificial intelligence, but with people who are building automated systems. And if you're foolish enough to build an automated system, say a drone, and you mount guns onto the drone, and then you give that drone the power to make decisions whether to, lethal capabilities based on its own algorithms, then you're really just creating problems for yourself. So the challenge isn't AI. The challenge is what happens when you take human biases and bad human judgments and automate them at scale. And ultimately, that's an anthropological rather than a technological challenge.
Thank you, Mike. We have also our online audience with us here. Aleksandra Przegalińska, who is the vice rector at the Kosmolagno University here in Warsaw, Poland, has a question to you. Aleksandra, the floor is yours.
Dear Mike, many thanks for your presentation. I'm Aleksandra Przegalińska from Kosmolagno University in Warsaw, Poland. I'm also a specialist in artificial intelligence. And my question to you is related to mitigating fear of AI. I think leadership and artificial intelligence are recently two crucial topics that need to be well connected. And I'm wondering, what's your take on collaborative artificial intelligence?
So collaborative artificial intelligence, how do you understand that?
It's a great point. And you know, it's something that we've been considering for some time, which is that there are really three possible scenarios. One in which humans make all the decisions, another in which machines make all the decisions, and another that human beings and machines work together. And the fact is that these tools will all be used for different things. There are some types of decisions in organizations or in the world or in cities that are inherently deterministic. So although they're complex, you know that when something happens, something should be the response. But there are other types of decisions that are more ambiguous. It's harder to sometimes know the relations. And this is where machines can help us by making suggestions, making recommendations, but humans still need their unique perception that will provide context to those judgments. But you know what? There's a whole set of decisions that we need to make as a society that are inherently human-shaped. And these, I think, we hopefully will have more time to debate when we can delegate more of the non-essential things to technology.
Thank you, Mike. And we have one more question that comes from online. Caitlin Valesco-Banzes from the World Youth Alliance in New York City.
Hello, my name is Caitlin Velasco-Banez, and I'm an advocacy intern for World Youth Alliance headquarters in New York City. Today, I would like to direct a question to Mr. Michael Walsh. And to preface that, I want to highlight the description he provided in addressing an anthropological approach towards understanding the true potential of human beings, particularly because this reminds me of World Youth Alliance's Human Dignity curriculum and their belief that humanity is the world's greatest resource. Furthermore, what are your thoughts on the role of artificial intelligence in terms of advancing current and future international development goals? Also, as your ideas allude to the integration of humanities with STEM, in your opinion, based on the set of guiding principles that you articulated, what are some anticipated technological innovations and challenges in international education in terms of investing in future generations and empowering youth to respond to new challenges in their community? Thank you for considering these questions, and I extend my sincerest thanks to all in attendance for your time and attention to these important global topics.
So education, youth, the future, how can artificial intelligence technology contribute to that? That's an easy one.
Not easy to answer in 15 seconds either. Honestly, though, I think education is the main point here. When I was alluding earlier to the risks of the algorithmic inequality between people that work for the algorithms and work on them, the only way you bridge that gap is, you know, not a universal basic wage or redistribution or higher taxes. It's actually education. It's making sure that the next generation have the skills and capabilities that they need to really thrive in this new environment. And I think that's really essential. And it's not something as simple as learning programming or learning coding. It's really developing, and this is as much a philosophical challenge, you know, really that new mindset that blends the best of humanities and scientific and technical knowledge to really be leaders in this new environment.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm afraid our time is up, but thank you for this fascinating both opening statement and then our discussion with our experts and online audience. It was a true pleasure to have you with us, and we hope to have you back for other master classes in the future. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's simply a wrap-up. I would like to thank our guests here, Dawid Gregorz, who was with us, Bartosz Kuźniarz, and of course, Jacek Kędzior, for the discussion, for the support and for the reflection that we've had today. I would like to encourage our online audience also to follow us on social media, including our website, masterclassnasa.org. You will be able to see all these videos on our YouTube channel, so you can rewatch them and reflect on some of them, because we've really moved across the board from the questions of the purpose of the universe to the questions of the future of mankind and, of course, sustainable economy. So huge play of topics, but we've, of course, only have been here to inspire you to think more. And for the very last point, I would like to bring in again Kate's and Mike's mottos. Kate said, who we tell ourselves we are is who we become. And Mike said, the future is not invented. It is the one we choose to live. So this is, ladies and gentlemen, a call to action to you, because how our world is going to look like truly depends on our decisions we make today and your decisions that will shape the world. Looking forward to seeing you on our next masterclass. Thank you very much, and good afternoon and good night.